welcome. In this video we're going to be looking at the novel The Great Gatsby by F. Scott Fitzgerald. And what we're going to be looking at in this particular video is we're going to be looking at an outline of the story, we're going to be looking at the context and the value of the text. So the context of the period of the 1920s where it's set, and also the value of it as an American novel and as the great American novel as it's often called. So we're going to have a look at all those things. We're going to have a look at what makes the values of this story quite important and what it really does represent in its true essence. But first of all, we're just going to have a look at the basics of the book first. So it represents the vanity and decadence of 1920s America, and that's pretty much the key idea of the book, is that it's representing not necessarily a broad statement about the 1920s, it's representing those who are rich and wealthy in the 1920s. And it is claimed by many critics as the great American novel, as it is a representation of the American dream. Now, the American dream, as opposed to the Australian dream, which is just owning your own house, the American dream is one of prosperity, and it's one to have wealth and to be able to flaunt how much money you have. And so this is a perfect representation of it, because it's all about people flaunting their wealth and their value, and basically shows what happens when you've got a lot of prosperity but very little sense behind it. And definitely this is a story almost as much about the madness of those who have wealth as much as it is about wealth itself and what it does. Alright, let's look at the summary of the story. Now it begins with Nick Carraway, who is our narrator, and very strange for a narrator in this case, because he is one who's sort of an incidental character, and even though he's a main character, he often appears like a bit of a fly on the wall. And he doesn't really involve himself too much in the story. So we do get a sense that he's always there, but we don't really follow his story as much as we do characters such as Gatsby and Daisy. He is a war veteran and a bond salesman, so he's a veteran of World War I, and he's a bond salesman, so essentially he's a person who goes out trying to get money for loans for people. And he rents a house next to the mansion of Jay Gatsby. He is a second cousin of socialite Daisy Buchanan, and becomes entwined with the affairs of both her and her husband. And very early on in the novel, not only does she meet Tom, her husband, but he also meets Tom's mistress, his woman he's having an affair with. So immediately he's sort of already caught up in this grand social scheme without even really sort of asking to be invited into it. He sort of just gets into it. He's eventually also invited to meet Gatsby, who is the man who lives across from him, a wealthy yet quite aloof man who throws lavish parties. So he's quite enigmatic. He's one of those really strange, odd characters who seems to like to show off his wealth, but doesn't really give any indication as to why. He's not really a party man. He doesn't really drink. He doesn't really take part in a lot of the festivities. He just throws the parties and gets a whole heap of people to attend. And eventually he befriends Nick as well, as he is an old war veteran and pretty much has a similar story and background to what Nick has. So they have something in common. And in doing so, he asks to be reintroduced to Daisy, who just happens to be his lost love. So it's sort of a bit of a serendipity moment there, where just being around Nick, he finds that he's actually the cousin of the girl he's always fantasized about and always been in love with. And so he asks, in his own way, to be introduced or to have lunch with her, so he could basically try and reconnect with her and maybe try and restart their love affair again. After arranging a meeting, Daisy does indeed do this. She does fall for him, given that she is unhappy in her own marriage with Tom, and she's somewhat aware of the fact that Tom does have an extramarital affair. And so but it is an affair that Tom does uncover, and he does work out that she is having an affair with Gatsby. At the hotel, she is asked to choose which one she'd rather be with, whether it should be with Gatsby, and Gatsby puts forward this proposition, or Tom. And she does indeed choose neither, and in the ensuing drive home, she accidentally kills Tom's lover, Myrtle, in a hit-and-run accident, and Gatsby and Daisy, in their panic, basically flee the scene, and Gatsby then decides he will take the blame for the accident. After that, Tom and Daisy leave town, where Tom tells Myrtle's husband who she is also married, that Gatsby was responsible for Myrtle's death, and he basically distance Daisy and himself from it as much as he can. And he also claims that Gatsby was the woman he was having the affair with. So sort of all ties everything up, basically to pin everything on Gatsby. The man, Myrtle's husband, takes revenge, then killing Gatsby and himself. Finally, at the conclusion of the story, Nick arranges the funeral, in which, despite the fact, and there's a lot of irony in this, the amount of people who attend Gatsby's parties, only 3 people attend his funeral. And one of them is his father, the other is Nick, and another is a man called Allies, who Nick meets at the party, and is sort of this strange sort of character who, again, reveals a lot about him. Okay, so then what we have after that is we have Nick then heading back home to the West, where he comes from. And it's basically because of the fact that he's so fed up with this lifestyle. He's so tired of the sort of vanity and the people he's meeting in West Egg. He just gets so fed up that he does decide to head home to the Midwest. And it sort of ties in with the rest of the story as well, in that all these characters had come from the Midwest and had come from places which were sort of small and isolated and didn't really share a lot of the values that New York and certainly the wealthy area around West Egg also sort of contained. So to head back west is sort of basically marks that transition, that they were fish out of water, that they weren't really people who belonged in this environment, and it showed through the way that they self-destructed in that environment that they really didn't quite belong to it. So by heading back west, he basically shows that this sort of vanity has destroyed us, and he quits his job, he quits his life, he dumps his girlfriend Jordan, and basically heads back. Now, let's have a look at the context of 1920s America. And it was a time of great prosperity in the United States, which did pretty much end at the end of the decade, 1921, when we had the great stock market crash and the Great Depression began. But up until that point, it was really quite a fabulous time to be alive. It was a time where, particularly in the US, but also in Australia as well, where there was a lot of wealth being generated, particularly in the US because of things like oil, but also things like automobiles, which had just started to enter the mass production market. Home appliances, things such as toasters and vacuum cleaners were being introduced for the first time. And a whole heap of other sort of new technological innovations that had come through after World War I had started to hit the marketplace. And so a lot of people had become quite wealthy, and certainly a lot of the conveniences that, particularly in the case of something like toast or a vacuum cleaner, for instance, would often save a lot of people who live in ordinary homes the effort of what they would have to do, or basically it would save them a servant who would work for them or something along those lines. It would mean that they would are able to have more conveniences they could use for themselves, and it would mean that more people could access it, particularly in the case of the car and the Model T Ford, which was also around this period. More people could travel, more people could go to different places. It wasn't just a tool for the rich anymore. And even though this story is mostly about the wealthy, it shows that this was an age where luxury had started to hit the American household, and certainly it's something that I guess has continued on through that vein of prosperity since, and to have these conveniences at the home was something that was really happening for the first time. Mass production items such as the car basically transformed the American household and lifestyle, in other words. And that is a crucial part of basically this environment, is this world of mass convenience, but also this time where everything was possible, that you had things in your home that could do things that used to take you hours to do. And with all these innovations, they almost started to think people would live forever. Because of how quickly technology was helping them in their daily lives. And even though the technology sort of seems rather funny and outdated now, at the time it was considered huge and massive time savers. Also, this was a period after World War I, and this was a period which was basically almost ruled by the young, as in many people who had come back from the war didn't really want to talk about traditional and depressing topics anymore. They were really into politics because a lot of young men, particularly after World War One, where they were often sent to be slaughtered in many cases, didn't really have any time for politicians, particularly as a lot of the higher-ups or the aristocracies were the ones who were ordering them to die. So particularly certainly in the British environment, but also in the American environment as well, there was basically a desire to move away from the sort of the things which had brought upon war and started to think more about the conservative, or moving away from that past and sort of setting up a future where they could drink and they could have fun and they could go to clubs and dance and all those sorts of things. And it was certainly a period of great change and a movement towards what was basically coined as sort of a fun culture and a fun generation, which was an interesting shift compared to probably the decade before in the 1910s, where everything was a lot more Victorian and conservative, all those sorts of things. It was also a time of Prohibition, which was if you don't know much about it, was a period in American history where alcohol was banned. However, the moment alcohol was banned, a number of smugglers, gangsters and cartel owners were basically importing or making their own illegal alcohol and selling it in the streets, and basically leading to establishment of speakeasies. And that also sort of set up this subculture which was heavily influenced by a number of sort of minority groups that had been getting into supplying alcohol. And essentially that changed almost the entire lifestyle and culture, and particularly there's this time where there was a lot of wealth and a lot of power on offer for those who were willing to break the laws of prohibition. The value of the text is also, as I mentioned before, quite a powerful one, and particularly as it is one that embodies the American dream. Now, American culture does take this idea of the American dream quite seriously. It is literally about fame, fortune, and everything money can and can't buy. And certainly the idea of that influence and having money will allow you to get the things you can't buy. And particularly in the case of Gatsby, excuse me, you see that. You see someone who has one thing that money can't buy. He's got everything in the world except the woman he loves. And he still attempts, though, to use money. He uses money to throw lavish parties in the hope to get her to attend. So he's using wealth to get the one thing he can't buy. And he's trying to sort of buy everything around it so he can get access to her. And certainly all of these sorts of things really sort of do stem out of the text, and ones which basically match a lot of, if you think of greed and power and corruption now and how much of it is to do with wealth, a lot of those themes are quite persistent with this text, and particularly the sort of the airheaded nature of some people who do have wealth, the ones who don't really care where their money goes as long as it goes towards something nice and for them. So there's also this sort of decadence and selfishness in there as well. The text itself, though, didn't exactly, it achieves some success in its earlier print run, but it wasn't really up to its full notoriety until after World War II. And this was because there was a disastrous second print run of the book, which there were 150,000 copies of the book lying around in the warehouse somewhere. So during World War II, when they wanted to get the soldiers something to do, when they weren't in active conflict, they gave copies out to the soldiers, and courtesy of doing that, it gained some popularity afterwards. And it wasn't until the 1960s where The Great Gatsby was actually finally truly recognised as probably what it is today. So even though it was recognised as a very good novel at the time, it sort of did get lost a bit, and Fitzgerald in particular was pretty much forgotten about when he died in 1940. So that basically that era, that time when he lived, was almost pretty much forgotten, and it wasn't until afterwards when American servicemen had started picking up copies of his story, and when others started to sort of, when the reading of it spread, was when it really started to get some popularity. And it is also a text, as I said, that is an apt representation of 1920s American. Maybe not the whole thing, but certainly the evolution of materialism and opulence at the time. So this evolution of how wealth goes. I mean, it used to be that wealth brought you power and fame and basically as many businesses and as many workers as you could get your hands on. In the 1920s, on the other hand, money was going to people who had nothing to spend it on, except pretty much themselves. And so in this case, we sort of find a lot of new money coming in, a lot of people who have earned money in other places with this fabulous sort of wealth, who have nowhere to spend it. And certainly this is where this sort of party culture comes in, and this idea of being connected, being glamorous, all those things, really has sort of hit the fore, and particularly in this text is one of those ideas that really does come out quite strongly. And this is why it is such a powerful text to study, because of the fact that it's not something that represents a one person's life. It represents almost an entire decade, an entire culture, an entire way of living, and that's really quite a special thing to be able to do in a text, but this one does manage to pull it off. But anyway, that's really about it for the value, the summary, and the context of The Great Gatsby, and certainly it's one which I hope you do, if you haven't read it yet, and I certainly hope you have read it before you do watch this video. But it's something that I really hope you do enjoy it, and really do pick up on some of these things that are in there, because they are quite romantic ideas, and certainly they give you a lot of depth to talk about, and certainly a lot of themes and ideas do come out of it. But otherwise, until next time, I'll see you later.